Sunday will mark the second Juneteenth since being established as a federal holiday by President Biden last year. And several celebrations are planned across the city to mark the day that slaves in Texas, the last Confederate state with institutional slavery, were notified of their long overdue freedom more than 2 years after Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Among the celebrations, King Boston's week-long Embrace Ideas Festival, for which GBH is a sponsor, by the way, kicked off Monday with a lineup of speakers including Yolanda Renee King, the only granddaughter of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott, Boston Foundation President Lee Pelton, Globe columnist Janae Osterhelt, and plenty more. I'm joined by the executive director of King Boston, Imari Paris Jeffries. Imari, it's great to see you.
Jim, great to see you again.
You know, I'm assuming that most people watching, because I was in this boat a while ago, know very little about the history of Juneteenth, don't know that it's been celebrated in many parts of the country for more than 150 years. Could you put a little flesh on the bare bones that I described a minute ago?
Yeah, it's a holiday that commemorates a time when the last folks who were enslaved found out that they were indeed free. It was based on a military order. And in some communities across the country, this final day in June, this Juneteenth, this day of emancipation has been celebrated. It's been a day of liberation, independence, and oftentimes celebrated almost like a 4th of July and that we celebrate in the country, but for the Black community. And so there's been a long-standing Juneteenth celebration here in Boston in Franklin Park that's been going on for years, and a lot of the elders of our community have been the sponsors of this event.
Do you worry that, I mean, Sunday will be celebrated on Monday as a federal holiday. Do you worry that this becomes, like so many federal holidays, a day off and you go buy something on a discount and you don't spend a minute thinking about why we're commemorating anything?
I do worry about that. And I think, some of us have seen that recent controversy. I think there was a big box store in the country that was selling Juneteenth.
Yes, it was.
Ice cream and Juneteenth party favors. There was a museum in another part of the country that was for Juneteenth selling watermelon flavored salads, watermelon infused salads. And so, we are worried about Juneteenth being commodified and really commercialized in a way that the fictional Mexican holiday of Cinco de Mayo is kind of made into this day of red cups and wearing sarapes and painting mustaches on your face, or the way in which some folks who are not of Chinese descent celebrate Chinese New Year. And so I think there's a lot of us who are worried about this holiday being commodified in that way.
Which is, I assume, what gives birth to the Embrace Ideas Festival this week. And by the way, tomorrow, it's actually GBH is the sponsor of tomorrow. Can you give us a little taste of what has happened and what you intend? And most importantly, tell me what little 14-year-old granddaughter of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott had to say on Monday.
Yeah, and if you've never heard her speak, I mean, she's phenomenal. She is a phenomenal young person. And so there was on this panel on our first day with our partner, the Global Citizen Circle, we had Yolanda King and the young person from Boston really have an incredible conversation about the importance of youth activism and youth leadership in this moment. And so that's how we kicked off the day. And so it was an honor to have Martin Luther King III up here and Yolanda to kick off this holiday with us. And we'll hopefully see them back, or some of them back, for the unveiling of the King Memorial in January of next year.
And it's tomorrow at GBH, am I right? Reparations is the topic of the day?
Reparations, that's right, that's right. And so this idea of Juneteenth being a holiday that is centering Black people in our country, but also could be a day of learning, ideas, contemplation, et cetera. And so I think that is why King Boston, which is an organization committed to racial equity in the business of monuments, memorials, and symbols, feels like Juneteenth, as this new holiday that has emerged during the pandemic, is an opportunity for Boston to perhaps lead the country in showing the country how one might celebrate Juneteenth.
We should be clear. Most people associate King Boston with this incredibly beautiful thing that is being built that you referenced a minute ago, the Embrace, that'll be just stunningly beautiful, I think, on Boston Common. But spend a minute, that's not And in addition to the Ideas Festival, there's a deeper long-term purpose for King Boston that you're working on making happen. Could you briefly tell people what that is, Imari?
Yeah. And King Boston is a racial equity organization that is at the intersection of a policy and research organizations. And so that's one of the things that we do, is that we create unique policy and research that is focused on anti-racism, that's focused on welcome and belonging. And so reparations is one of the things on our policy agenda. And we're an arts and culture organization. So part of our overall work is to build the Embrace, which will be unveiled next year, but also the Embrace Center. So this one-of-a-kind museum cultural experience in Roxbury that we're hoping to put in P3.
You know, the execution of George Floyd was both a time of obviously unimaginable horror, but following that, a time of almost unimaginable hope in the minds of a lot of people. We'd finally see police reform. There'd finally be serious talk about reparations. There'd be health equity, equity in social determinants. But a couple of years out, a police reform has disappeared on the federal level. Some level it has been implemented in a few places like Massachusetts. The wealth gap is still yawning. And at least by my look at things, we have white supremacy on the rise, suppression of voting rights of poor people and people of color in particular, a Supreme Court that in the next term, very possibly, is going to repeal the vestiges of affirmative action in higher education. Am I mischaracterizing the direction in which we've gone in these couple of years?
I think I don't think you have. But I think with the type of forward momentum we've seen in the last few years prior to now, we expected this type of pushback. And I think 400 years of a society and a culture that's rooted on white supremacy and a culture that started off with folks being enslaved isn't going to change overnight. And so I think part of our change work in Boston is thinking about this decade, 2020, which was the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower landing and Plymouth Plantation, and to 2030, which is the 400th anniversary of Boston. And so we're thinking about this 10 years as incremental change. And I think we have a lot to be excited about in Massachusetts through the emergence of our civic and our elected leaders and the type of conversations that we're having. I think Boston and Massachusetts is incredibly interested in keeping this momentum and the change at hand. I think the rest of the country, we're seeing that pushback front and center. And so I'm hopeful about Massachusetts. I'm hopeful when I see things like the driver's license for undocumented folks be something that's passed recently. I'm hopeful that we are open-minded and optimistic around how we need to lean into including people in our state. And I think because Massachusetts is one of the storytelling cities of America, there's an echoing effect on what happens here, like healthcare reform, right? And so we're one of the states where that originated and the rest of the country followed suit. And so I think what happens in Massachusetts reverberates throughout the country. And so I'm optimistic about that.
Well, let me tell you, there's not nearly enough hope on this show, Imari, and thank you for providing a bit. Good luck the rest of the week, next week, and in the months ahead. We'll talk to you plenty, I'm sure. Thanks.
Thank you for having me. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.